Talia Bennett was seconds from collapsing when the bus doors hissed open, and the cold wind slapped her face like a warning. She stepped off the Greyhound, her designer heels wobbling on the cracked pavement of the small Colorado town she hadn't planned on being in. Her silk blouse clung to her back with sweat, her vision blurred from the 3 sleepless nights she'd spent flying between board meetings in Tokyo, emergency acquisitions in Berlin, and a PR disaster in New York. She hadn't eaten in almost a day, hadn't slept properly in 3. Her phone had died somewhere in Kansas, and for once she didn't care. No one here knew she was Talia Bennett, CEO of one of the largest tech investment firms in the world, heir to the Bennett fortune, and a woman who'd just walked away from her own empire. She clutched her tote bag tighter and blinked up at the overcast sky, swaying on her feet, and then everything went sideways. Her knees gave out, her legs folded under her, and she felt herself falling. "Whoa, hey, I got you," a voice said, strong arms catching her just before she hit the ground. She blinked hard, her vision adjusting to the man who now held her. He had warm brown eyes, a patchy beard, and thick arms that wrapped around her like a shield. He wore an old flannel shirt and jeans, his hands rough but gentle as he steadied her upright. "Can you hear me?" he asked, eyes scanning her face. "You all right? I'm fine," she whispered, breathless, though her legs still felt like jelly. "You don't look fine," he muttered, crouching to pick up her spilled bag. A juice bottle rolled out, followed by a crushed boarding pass and a silk scarf. "I just need a minute," she said, trying to stand straight. "I haven't slept." "Yeah, no kidding," he said, eyebrows raised. "You look like you ran a marathon in heels." He glanced around the bus station, which was more like a glorified shack. "Look, my truck's just over there. I live nearby. You need food, water, maybe a nap. I've got all 3. She hesitated, unsure if she should trust this stranger. But then a small voice piped up behind him. "Daddy, is she okay?" Talia's eyes shot down to a little girl with curly black hair, maybe 4 or 5, clinging to the man's leg with a worried look. "She's just tired, sweetheart," the man said, ruffling the girl's hair. "She's had a long day." The girl nodded solemnly, then looked up at Talia. "You can come to our house, we got soup." Talia felt something break open in her chest. "Soup sounds really good." The man helped her into his battered truck, the little girl sliding in beside her. The inside smelled like crayons and pine. A stuffed unicorn sat buckled into the middle seat. "I'm Dawson Price," he said, starting the engine. "And this little chatterbox is my daughter, Sadie." "Talia," she said softly. "Just Talia." She didn't add Bennett. Didn't mention Forbes lists, private jets, or the billion-dollar company she'd left behind. For the first time in years, she didn't want to be anyone but herself. By the time they pulled up to a small cabin tucked between pine trees, Talia's eyes were fluttering shut. "You can crash on the couch," Dawson said, handing her a blanket. "I'll heat up the soup." She didn't remember falling asleep, only that she woke hours later to the smell of tomato basil and the quiet hum of a cartoon playing in the background. Sadie was curled up on the rug with a coloring book. Dawson was in the kitchen stirring a pot. "You okay?" he asked when he saw her stir. She nodded, sitting up slowly. "I think I slept for the first time in days." He smiled, not the polished kind she was used to seeing from boardroom sharks, but something softer. "Real." "You looked like you needed it," he said. Talia ate the soup in silence, watching Sadie color and listening to the wind rustle the trees outside. The cabin was small, worn, but warm. The furniture mismatched, but clean. There were drawings taped to the fridge and a picture of a woman, a younger Dawson, kissing a blonde woman's cheek. "She was Sadie's mom," Talia asked softly. Dawson nodded. "Cancer, 2 years ago." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice catching. He shrugged, but his jaw tightened. "We're doing okay. Some days better than others." Talia swallowed hard, surprised by how much that single sentence hit her. She was used to power moves and fake smiles. This was different. "Why were you out there?" he asked finally. "The bus stop." "You don't look like someone who lands in a town like this by accident." She paused. "I needed to get away." "From what?" "Everything." He didn't press, just nodded like he understood. Talia stayed 1 night, then 2. By the 3rd, she was helping Sadie bake cookies and laughing when Dawson tried and failed to fix the microwave. They ate together, played board games, and every night she sat on the porch with Dawson, drinking tea and watching the stars. "You're not from around here," Dawson said one night, his eyes flicking to her delicate gold necklace. "You've got a vibe," she chuckled. "A vibe," he shrugged. "You talk like you've been in rooms with people who wear suits that cost more than my truck." She raised an eyebrow. "Maybe I have," he glanced at her, a grin tugging at his mouth. "Runaway bride, not exactly." "Fugitive heiress," she laughed, the sound surprising her. "Closer." He leaned back, watching her. "You don't have to tell me, I'm glad you're here," her heart skipped. "I'm glad I am too." She didn't mean to feel this. Not for a man who lived in a cabin and drove a truck that rattled. Not when she had an empire to return to. But every time he looked at her like that, like she wasn't a billionaire or a brand, just a woman, she felt herself falling. And this time, she didn't want to stop. The sun filtered through the windows in muted gold, spilling across the wooden floor in soft streaks. Talia sat at the tiny kitchen table, her fingers curled around a chipped mug of black coffee. She was wearing a flannel shirt that clearly belonged to Dawson. It hung off her shoulders in that oddly comforting way only well-worn clothes could. Her own blouse and slacks were folded neatly on the back of the nearby armchair, freshly washed and drying over the heater. Sadie was at the other end of the table, humming to herself as she carefully arranged plastic animal figurines into what appeared to be a very dramatic jungle standoff. "She's not usually this quiet," Dawson said, as he set down a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Talia. "She's trying to impress you." Sadie didn't look up. "I am not," she whispered, still focused on her tigers. Talia smiled and took a bite. "Well, it's working." Dawson leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. "You planning to head back today?" She hesitated, her fork pausing mid-air. "I don't know yet. Whoever you're escaping from going to come looking." She glanced out the window where the trees swayed gently, oblivious to her silence. "Probably." He nodded slowly, not pushing. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but if you're in any trouble, I'm not," she cut in a little too quickly. "It's just complicated." He considered that, then gestured toward her plate. "Well, eat up." Complicated's easier to face on a full stomach. Later that morning, Dawson loaded Sadie into the back of the truck. She had preschool in town, and he had a shift at the hardware store. Talia stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching them leave. A part of her expected him to tell her it was time to go, that whatever kindness he'd offered had a hard limit. But instead, he said, "There's leftover stew in the fridge and a stack of books in the basket by the couch. Make yourself at home." Then they were gone, the sound of gravel crunching under tires fading into the trees. Talia stood there a long moment, her fingers twitching with the phantom weight of a phone she hadn't touched in days. Her body ached for the pressure of emails, meetings, demands. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to miss it. She spent the morning walking the perimeter of the property. There was a narrow stream at the edge of the woods, and an old tire swing hanging from a tree that creaked with every breeze. A hand-carved sign nailed to the fence read, "Sadie's Kingdom." By the time Dawson and Sadie returned, the sun was slipping low behind the trees. "We brought pizza," Dawson said, holding up a greasy box. "It's terrible, you'll love it." Sadie tugged at Talia's wrist as they stepped inside. "I made you something." Talia followed her to the fridge where a crayon drawing had been taped up. It showed a woman in a long blue shirt with yellow hair, standing between a stick figure with a beard and a small one with curls. All three were smiling under a bright red sun. Talia stared at it for a long time. "You made me part of your family," Sadie nodded, already climbing onto a chair to eat. Dawson didn't say anything, but when Talia looked at him, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not curiosity, not suspicion, something gentler. Something that made her stomach tighten. After dinner, Dawson stepped outside to stack firewood. Talia joined him, brushing her hair out of her face as the wind picked up. "You didn't have to let me stay this long," she said. "Didn't have to," he agreed, setting another log onto the pile. "Wanted to?" She watched him work, muscles taut beneath his shirt, the scent of pine and smoke clinging to the air around him. "You run this place alone?" she asked. "Pretty much. My sister helps out when she can. She lives about 20 minutes away." Talia crouched to pick up a chunk of wood. "And your job?" "Pays enough to keep the lights on. Not much left over, but we manage." She turned the piece of wood over in her hands. You ever wish you had more? He glanced at her. More what? Money, power, options. Dawson leaned on the axe handle. I used to, before Sadie. Before I learned the difference between having a full wallet and a full life. She didn't answer. She couldn't. That night, after Sadie had been tucked in and the fire crackled low in the hearth, Talia sat cross-legged on the couch while Dawson poured them each a glass of whiskey. I used to think success meant being indispensable, she said, her voice soft. That if I stopped for even a second, the whole world would collapse. Turns out the world doesn't even flinch. He handed her a glass. Maybe it's not the world that needs you to keep going. Maybe it's just you. Her fingers tightened around the glass. I walked away from a company I built from nothing. I abandoned deals, partners, everything. And the worst part is, I don't know if I want to go back. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of firewood. You don't owe anyone an apology for needing to breathe, Dawson said. She looked at him then, really looked, and felt something shift, something quiet and dangerous, like the first pull of a tide before it drags you under. I should leave, she whispered. Tomorrow. He didn't look surprised. I figured. You're not going to try and stop me. His expression was unreadable. You don't stop a storm, you just wait to see where it lands. She stared into her glass, the amber liquid catching the firelight. I don't know if I'm a storm or a mistake. Dawson touched her hand just briefly. You're not a mistake. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. At dawn, she got up quietly, folded the blanket, and started to write a note. But before she could finish, Sadie came padding into the room, rubbing her eyes. You're leaving? She asked, voice small. Talia froze. I was thinking about it. Will you come back? The question hit her harder than she expected. Her throat tightened. I don't know. Sadie reached out and wrapped her arms around Talia's waist. I want you to. Talia closed her eyes, holding her close, and realized for the first time in her life she didn't know what she wanted, but she knew she wasn't ready to walk away from this. Not yet. Talia stood on the porch with her arms crossed, watching the rain fall in thick, steady sheets that blurred the tree line. The chill in the air carried the scent of wet earth and cedar. A storm had rolled in overnight, sudden and relentless, and now the entire sky hung heavy and gray. Behind her, Dawson was moving through the cabin, dragging towels to the front door and checking the wood stove. Sadie sat cross-legged by the window, humming as she braided yarn into the mane of a toy horse. I don't think I've seen this much rain since I was a kid, Dawson called out. River'll be over the banks by morning if it keeps up. Talia turned toward him, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Is that a problem? Not for us, but the bridge into town might be out for a day or two. You were thinking about leaving today, weren't you? She looked back out at the misted woods. I was. Dawson didn't reply right away. He set the last towel down and leaned against the doorframe. Maybe that's your sign to stay a little longer. Talia pressed her lips together. I don't believe in signs. Doesn't mean they're not real. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked back inside, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. Later in the afternoon, the power flickered and went out. Sadie let out a soft gasp, then immediately clapped both hands over her mouth like she'd broken something. It's all right, Dawson said, reaching for the lantern stacked on top of the cabinet. We've got backup. He handed one to Talia and lit the other, the room filling with a warm, golden glow that softened everything. Shadows stretched long across the walls. The fireplace hissed as Dawson added another log. Guess we're stuck, Talia said, settling onto the couch. Guess we are. Dawson crouched near the hearth, poking at the flames, then looked over his shoulder. You ever been somewhere this quiet before? She shook her head. Not since I was a teenager. My family had a summer cabin in the Catskills. I hated it, no cell service. He chuckled. Sounds like paradise. It wasn't. I spent the whole summer counting the days until I could get back to the city. Dawson stood and joined her at the couch. So what changed? She hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Maybe I did. Or maybe I got tired of hearing my own voice echo in boardrooms. He studied her face for a moment. Do you miss it? I thought I would. Sadie padded over with a blanket bundled in her arms. She handed it to Talia with a shy smile. You can use mine. It's the warmest. Talia unfolded the blanket and draped it over her legs. Thank you, that's very generous. Sadie nodded solemnly, then curled up beside her. Dawson took the armchair across from them, resting his elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone more careful now. "You've been here a while, and I know I said you didn't have to explain anything, but I can't help wondering, how long do you plan on hiding?" Talia didn't flinch, didn't pretend not to understand. "I'm not sure," she said after a moment. "I don't even know what I'm hiding from anymore. Anger. Expectations, myself maybe." Dawson tilted his head slightly. "You're not scared of going back." "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But I'm more afraid of going back just to prove I can. I've been proving things my whole life. I don't know how to stop." Sadie had drifted off, her head resting against Talia's thigh. The room was quiet again, save for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Dawson leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. "You could stay." Talia looked up sharply. "Not forever," he added. "Just until you figure out what you want. No pressure, no questions, just space." She swallowed hard. "You'd be okay with that?" "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." Talia glanced down at Sadie, her small face relaxed in sleep. "And what if I already know what I want, and it's the one thing I can't have?" Dawson's voice was steady. "Then you fight for it, or you let it go, but either way, you make the choice." That night, the storm intensified. Thunder rolled low and heavy across the hills, and the wind howled against the windows. Talia couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed in the tiny guest room, Dawson's flannel shirt still wrapped around her like armor. She reached for the leather-bound notebook Dawson had left on the nightstand. Empty pages, no title, just paper and ink. She opened it and began to write. Not a business plan, not a press release, just words, real ones. By the time morning came, the storm had passed. The sky was pale blue and sunlight spilled across the floorboards. Downstairs, she found Dawson pouring coffee. He looked up and something passed between them, a shift, a thread pulled taut. "I wrote something," she said, holding out the notebook. He took it, eyes scanning the first page. Then the second, his brow furrowed. "You didn't just leave your company," he said slowly. "You resigned from your own board." Talia nodded. "They don't know yet, but they will. You're walking away from everything." "No," she said. "I'm walking toward something else." Dawson looked up at her. "What exactly?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I think it starts here." The back door opened then, and Sadie stepped in, her boots muddy and her cheeks bright pink. "The bridge is still closed," she announced. "Uncle Kyle said nobody's going anywhere until tomorrow." Talia smiled. "Guess we've got another day." Dawson set the notebook aside. "You hungry? I could eat." He turned to the stove. "Good, because we're having pancakes, and Sadie's in charge of the blueberries." Sadie beamed and darted into the kitchen. Talia stood there for a moment, watching them move around each other with the ease of habit. She felt something tighten in her chest, something she hadn't let herself feel in years, hope, and for the first time she didn't try to silence it. Talia stood at the edge of the riverbank, watching the water churn with last night's storm. The sky had cleared, but the air still held a faint tension, like the earth hadn't quite exhaled yet. Her boots sank slightly in the damp ground as she traced the current with her eyes, following it as it disappeared into the trees. Behind her, Dawson was loading firewood into the back of the truck, preparing to drive a few miles out where a neighbor needed help clearing a downed tree. Sadie was with his sister for the afternoon, off on a promised adventure that involved goats and a garden hose. "You sure you don't want to come?" Dawson called over his shoulder. She turned to face him, and missed the chance to be alone with an actual thought. "Tempting, but I think I'll stay." He gave her a look, more amused than questioning. "Don't wander too far. That current's stronger than it looks. I can handle myself." "That's not the same as asking if you should." Talia raised an eyebrow. "You always this poetic before noon." He shrugged and tossed the last piece of wood into the truck bed. "Only when I know someone's listening." She watched him drive down the dirt road until the engine faded into the silence of the woods. Inside the cabin, the light had changed. Sunlight filtered through the windows in soft angles, catching dust motes in a lazy dance. She moved through the space slowly, fingertips brushing the edge of the kitchen counter, the curve of the windowsill, the rim of the coffee mug Dawson had used that morning. She stopped at the bookshelf tucked between the fireplace and the front door. It was a modest collection, worn spines and dog-eared pages manuals on woodworking. a few well-loved westerns, classic poetry, and a surprising number of children's books with taped spines. At the bottom, tucked haphazardly between two gardening guides, was a worn leather photo album. She pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping it open. There were pictures of Sadie in all seasons bundled in snow gear, covered in finger paint, asleep in Dawson's lap with spaghetti sauce on her face. But what caught her breath was a photo near the back. Dawson, younger, tanned, standing in front of a small workshop with a sign that read Price Woodworks. His arms were folded, a grin splitting his face, and behind him sat a row of handcrafted rocking chairs. She turned the page. Another photo, this one of a sleek showroom in Denver, a certificate of recognition pinned to the wall. She turned again. A clipping from a magazine, the headline half torn but still legible. Local carpenters' designs featured in National Living magazine. She stared at the photo for a long time, her mind spinning. Dawson hadn't just carved furniture for neighbors. He'd built something real, and he'd never once mentioned it. By the time he returned, the sky was deepening again, the clouds shifting into a bruised purple. He stepped inside, brushing leaves from his jacket. "Everything's still here?" he asked. She held up the photo album. "You won awards." He paused mid-step. "That was a long time ago. You didn't think to mention it." He walked over, glancing down at the open page. "Doesn't come up much when you're fixing leaky roofs and chasing goats. You had a business, a brand." "I had a plan," he corrected. "Then Sadie came along, and then Claire got sick." Priorities changed. Talia stood. "You didn't just walk away, you gave it up." "I made a choice," he said simply, "and I'd make it again." She studied his face. "You could have kept it going, scaled back, hired help." "I didn't want help," he said. "I wanted to be there when my daughter woke up scared in the middle of the night. I wanted to be the one making her lunches, not reading about it in updates from a nanny." Talia looked at him, really looked, and felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, something deeper. Something that dared to hope. "I think I came here because I forgot how to make choices that weren't about winning," she said. "Every decision I've made for years has been about advancement, power, control." "You think this place is an escape?" Dawson asked. "It's not, it's just quieter. The decisions are smaller, but they still matter." She stepped closer. "You make it look easy." "It's not," he said. "It's just worth it." Her eyes dropped to the photo still in her hand. "You miss it, though." "I miss the part where I built something that lasted. Sometimes I wonder if I gave that up forever." "You didn't," she said quietly. "You just shifted what you were building." Their eyes met, and the air between them changed, not slowly but like a door blowing open in a gust. "I have to go back," she said, voice tight. "Not to the company, but to tell them I'm done. Officially, I can't just vanish." Dawson nodded. "You don't owe me an explanation." "I'm not explaining," she said. "I'm telling you because I want to come back, not to hide, to stay." Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. "You sure?" he asked. "No," she admitted, "but I've never been more sure of wanting something that scared me." He stepped forward slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that had finally stopped running. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. "Not your past, not your money. Not your name." "I know," she whispered, "but I want you to know all of it." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded letter. "Bored resignation. I wrote it the night of the storm. I just need to deliver it." He looked at the paper, then at her. "When? Tomorrow?" He nodded again. "I'll take you into town. Roads should be clear now." The next morning they packed up the truck. Talia wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair tied back, her expression calm in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with decision. When they reached the edge of town, she turned to him. "Come with me," he shook his head. "This part's yours. I don't want to do it alone." "You won't," he said. "I'll be here when you're done." She leaned in and kissed him soft, certain, not rushed. Then she stepped out of the truck and walked toward the courthouse where she'd arranged to have the letter notarized and delivered. When she returned an hour later, Dawson was sitting on the hood, arms crossed, sun on his face. She walked up to him and held out her hand. "It's done." He took it, his fingers intertwining with hers. "What now?" "Now," she said, "we go home." And that's exactly where they went. Not to the world she'd built from glass towers and steel contracts, but to the one made of pine-scented mornings, crooked porch steps, and a little girl who greeted her with a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. Love didn't ask her to give up who she was. It simply reminded her who she'd always been. The porch creaked softly beneath Talia's boots as she stepped outside, steam curling from the mug in her hands. The air was brisk, laced with the scent of morning frost and chimney smoke. The trees had begun to shift into their golden hues, the first signs of fall brushing the tips of the leaves. Dawson was down by the shed, coaxing a stubborn hinge back into place with a tool she didn't recognize. She watched him for a moment, the easy rhythm of his movements grounding her more than any meditation had ever managed. When he looked up, his expression warmed. "You're up early." She made her way down the steps. The bed felt too empty without a small tornado kicking me in the ribs. "Sadie's making pancakes with my sister. She announced she's adding marshmallows this time." Talia raised an eyebrow. "Bold," he chuckled, brushing metal shavings from his hands. "You sleep at all last night?" "I did. First time I've slept through the night without a single dream in weeks." Dawson leaned one shoulder against the shed, studying her. "You've really settled in." She tilted her head. "I didn't realize how much noise I'd been carrying until it was gone." He set the wrench down. "You ever think about what comes next?" "I have. And I want to buy the old bookstore in town." He blinked. "What?" "There's a for sale sign in the window. I called the number yesterday. The owner's retired and can't find a buyer who doesn't want to tear it down." "You want to run a bookstore?" "I don't want to run anything," she said. "But I want to create something that lasts and doesn't require quarterly reports or investor calls. Maybe it becomes a space for kids after school. Maybe we host readings. Maybe it's just a quiet place for people to think." Dawson rubbed the back of his neck, a slow smile spreading. "You're really doing this?" "I already wired the deposit this morning." He stepped closer. "You didn't even tell me." "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure it wasn't just another distraction." "It's not." He took the mug from her hands and set it on the porch railing. Then he reached for her waist, pulling her in. She let him, her hands sliding up his chest. "I wasn't sure anyone could walk into our life and make it better just by being here," he said. "But you did. You and Sadie gave me a reason to stop running." He kissed her, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for promises because it already knew them. Later that afternoon, they drove into town. Talia wore a green wool coat she'd pulled from a local thrift shop, and Dawson had finally repaired the passenger door latch, though it still groaned when she opened it. The bookstore sat on the corner of Main Street, its windows dusty but intact. Inside, shelves still stood, empty but proud. Talia unlocked the door with a new key and stepped inside, inhaling the scent of old wood and faded paper. "It's going to take some work," Dawson said, turning in a slow circle. "I've done harder things," she said, already imagining the shelves full, the lighting warm, the door chime ringing with life again. He leaned over the counter and found an old guest book. The last entry was from 4 years ago. "Think people will come?" he asked. "They'll come," she said. "Even if I have to hand-deliver invitations." When they returned home, Sadie was waiting, her cheeks sticky with syrup and her curls plastered to her forehead. She ran straight into Talia's arms. "Did you get the keys?" she asked breathlessly. "I did. Can I help paint the walls?" "I want mine to be purple," Talia laughed. "Yours?" "I'm going to have a reading fort, all mine." Dawson lifted Sadie into his arms. "Looks like you've already got a business partner." That night, they celebrated with homemade pasta and a bottle of wine Dawson had been saving. Sadie fell asleep on the couch, arms wrapped around her unicorn, while Dawson and Talia curled together by the fire. "I've been thinking," he said, brushing his thumb along her hand. "Dangerous. I want to rebuild the workshop." She turned her head. "The one behind the shed, it's still got good bones. Could use a real roof, maybe some new tools." Her voice softened. "Is that something you want?" "It is, but only if you're here when I do it." She leaned into him. "I'm not going anywhere." A week later, the town gathered for the bookstore's soft opening. Children darted between shelves. Elderly couples held hands as they perused dusty first editions. A local musician played in the corner, and Sadie held court in the reading fort she'd constructed from purple blankets and string lights. Talia stood behind the counter, watching the space come alive. Dawson appeared beside her, holding 2 mugs of cider. Good turnout, he said. I bribed them with cookies, he bumped her shoulder. Still counts. As the last customers trickled out and the sun dipped below the hills, Talia turned out the front lights and locked the door. They walked home slowly, hand in hand, the gravel road glowing under the moonlight. I used to think love had to be loud, she said. Dramatic, big gestures and bigger sacrifices. And now I know it's in the quiet things, the everyday, the mornings with coffee, the way you look at me like I'm not a puzzle to solve. You're not, he said. You're home. She stopped him in the middle of the path and kissed him beneath the stars, the air cool around them, the world still. A year later, the bookstore thrived. Dawson's workshop produced custom pieces for clients upstate, and Talia had launched a literacy program that reached every school in the county. They married in the orchard behind the cabin, Sadie tossing petals from a wooden basket she'd painted herself. Their vows weren't grand or poetic. They were simple, honest. I choose this, Talia had said, her voice steady. Every day, every breath, and I'll build us something that lasts, Dawson had replied, his eyes full. They danced under strings of lights, ate cake that Sadie had helped decorate, and fell asleep that night wrapped in each other's arms, no noise, no chaos. Just peace. Not the kind you find when you run away, the kind you build when you finally stop.